March 19, 1943. Kriegsmarine Headquarters, Berlin. Admiral Karl Dönitz leaned over the mahogany table, studying reconnaissance photographs that his intelligence staff insisted were genuine. The images showed what appeared to be a fully operational airfield on Munda Point, New Georgia, where German naval intelligence had confirmed only dense jungle existed 3 weeks earlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The photographs were impossible. Dönitz had commanded U-boats in the previous war and understood logistics with brutal clarity. He knew what infrastructure required. He knew construction timelines. A major airfield demanded months of preparation, thousands of workers, massive equipment, and protected supply lines. Yet these photographs showed American aircraft operating from a base that should not exist. Across his desk lay similar reports from Japanese sources. Airfields appearing on Guadalcanal with impossible speed. Runways operational on Espiritu Santo weeks ahead of any reasonable timeline. Harbour facilities materializing on barren coral atolls. The pattern suggested either systematic deception or a capability that violated every principle of military engineering the Wehrmacht understood. Dönitz made a notation in his war diary. If American reports of Pacific construction capabilities prove accurate, all assumptions regarding Atlantic coastal defense require immediate revision. Enemy may establish operational ports and airfields on invasion beaches before reserve forces can respond. He had no way of knowing that his assessment, dismissed by many in the German High Command as alarmist, would prove catastrophically accurate. The Americans had indeed developed a construction capability that rendered traditional defensive calculations obsolete. They called them Seabees, and were rewriting the fundamental mathematics of modern warfare. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The revolution began not with strategic planning, but with murder. December 7th, 1941. When Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor, they simultaneously attacked Wake Island, where 1,200 American civilian contractors were building military installations under contract. International law was explicit. Civilians could not resist military attack. Those who did faced execution as unlawful combatants. 98 of these contractors chose to fight anyway. They were construction workers, not soldiers, but they understood what Japanese occupation meant. They manned anti-aircraft guns, defended beaches, and died alongside Marines. When Wake finally fell on December 23rd, the survivors became prisoners. 98 others were eventually executed by their captors, their bodies buried in unmarked graves. Rear Admiral Ben Morrell, Chief of the Navy's Bureau of Yards and Docks, received the Wake Island reports with cold fury. The strategic implications were immediately clear. The Pacific War would require construction of hundreds of bases across thousands of islands. Civilian contractors could not be armed, could not be ordered into combat zones, and could not defend themselves. Every construction project would require massive combat forces for protection, forces desperately needed elsewhere. The solution Morrell proposed was radical: create military construction battalions composed entirely of skilled tradesmen who could both build and fight. Men who could operate bulldozers under fire, who understood concrete and coral, who could defend their work sites with rifles when necessary. On December 28, 1941, just 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Morrell formally requested authorization to establish naval construction battalions. The proposal moved through Navy bureaucracy with unusual speed. By January 5, 1942, approval came through. Recruitment began immediately for what would officially be designated construction battalions, abbreviated CB, quickly becoming Seabees. The recruiting standards were unprecedented in American military history. The Navy sought men aged 18 to 50, though many who enlisted were older, lying about their ages to serve. Previous construction experience was not just preferred but required. Carpenters, welders, electricians, heavy equipment operators, concrete specialists, surveyors, demolition experts, structural engineers. The average age was 37, far older than typical military recruits. These were men who had built America's skyscrapers during the boom years, its bridges and dams during the Depression, its highways and power plants across decades of peacetime construction. Private First Class Frank Iafrati, who joined the 3rd Naval Construction Battalion in March 1942, later recalled the unusual nature of Seabee recruitment. The recruiting officer asked about my work history, not my education. When I told him I had operated cranes on the Golden Gate Bridge project, his eyes lit up. He said the Navy needed men who knew dirt, concrete, and steel. The physical exam was almost an afterthought. If you could swing a hammer and weren't falling apart, you were in. Training began at Camp Allen, Virginia, and quickly expanded to Camp Peary and other facilities, as recruitment exceeded expectations. The program combined military discipline with construction expertise. Recruits spent 3 weeks on basic military training, learning to march, salute, and handle weapons. Then came advanced construction exercises that assumed existing knowledge rather than teaching from basics. They practiced night construction under blackout conditions. They learned to work while wearing gas masks. They studied the load-bearing requirements for different aircraft types on various soil conditions. They trained to defend work sites against infantry assault. Most critically, they learned to work at speeds that civilian contractors would consider reckless. The Seabee motto emerged organically from these early battalions. Can-do became more than a slogan. It represented a fundamental shift in how military construction was conceptualized. Where traditional military engineers calculated what was possible, Seabees were trained to attempt what was necessary, regardless of whether engineering manuals declared it feasible. By mid-1942, the 1st Battalions were deploying to forward areas. The Bobcats, officially the 1st Naval Construction Battalion, arrived at Bora Bora in February. The 2nd Battalion went to Samoa. The 3rd deployed to the Society Islands. These initial deployments were defensive, building bases to protect sea lanes to Australia and New Zealand. The work was hard but relatively safe, far from Japanese forces. Everything changed with Guadalcanal. August 7, 1942. When the 1st Marine Division stormed ashore at Guadalcanal, their primary objective was not territory but an airfield. Japanese forces had been constructing a bomber base that would threaten Allied shipping throughout the South Pacific. The Marines captured the partially completed runway on the first day. Then the 6th Naval Construction Battalion went to work. The 6th had landed with the assault waves, combat engineers ready to fight or build as circumstances required. What they found was a partially graded runway approximately 2,600 feet long with no surfacing, no drainage, minimal compaction, and damage from pre-invasion naval bombardment. Japanese construction methods relied heavily on manual labor. Thousands of conscripted workers from Korea and Formosa had moved dirt in individual baskets, laid stones by hand, and graded surfaces with simple tools. The Seabees brought bulldozers, graders, rollers, and an American approach to construction that emphasized machinery over manpower. Within 48 hours, they had the runway operational for fighter aircraft. They named it Henderson Field, after a Marine aviator killed at Midway. Within 6 days, it could handle dive bombers and medium bombers. The speed astounded Marine commanders who had expected weeks of work, but keeping Henderson Field operational proved harder than building it. Japanese forces controlled the waters around Guadalcanal at night, running fast destroyers down the slot to bombard American positions. They called it the Tokyo Express. Americans called it the Rat Run. Almost every night, Japanese warships shelled Henderson Field. Almost every morning, the Seabees repaired the damage. A 500-pound bomb created a crater approximately 30 feet wide and 10 feet deep. Traditional repair methods involved filling the crater with dirt, compacting it in layers, and resurfacing. This process required days. The Seabees developed a system that reduced repair time to hours. They kept stockpiles of crushed coral ready. They had equipment pre-positioned around the field. When shells or bombs hit, repair crews moved immediately. They filled craters with coral, compacted it with portable rollers, and topped it with pierced steel planking. 4 hours after a bombardment ended, aircraft could operate again. Japanese pilots reported with growing frustration that damage they inflicted in morning raids was repaired before afternoon missions. The repair speed seemed impossible to observers trained in conventional military engineering. Captain Toshikazu Omae, operations officer for the Japanese Southeast Area Fleet, wrote in a report later captured by American forces, "The enemy possesses repair capabilities that render bombardment ineffective. Craters filled during night attacks are operational by dawn. Runway damage from airstrikes is repaired within hours. Standard attrition tactics prove useless against such construction speed." The secret was not just American equipment but American doctrine. Seabees were organized for continuous operations. 3 shifts worked around the clock. When one crew was repairing bomb damage, another was improving drainage, and a third was extending runways. Equipment operators worked 12-hour shifts, then slept in tents within sight of their bulldozers, ready to respond to emergencies. The November naval battle of Guadalcanal demonstrated Seabee resilience under the most extreme conditions. On the night of November 13, 1942, Japanese battleships Hiei and Kirishima approached Guadalcanal and opened fire with 14-inch guns. For 90 minutes they hammered Henderson Field with over 900 shells. The bombardment was the heaviest the field had yet endured. Dawn revealed catastrophic damage. Craters pocked the entire runway. Fuel dumps burned. Aircraft were destroyed. Buildings were shattered. By every conventional measure, Henderson Field was out of action. The 6th Battalion commander surveyed the destruction and gave a simple order: "We need the field operational by noon." His officers thought he was joking. He was not. Bulldozers rolled before the last fires were extinguished. Crews worked through smoke and heat. They filled craters, graded surfaces, laid matting, and restored fuel lines. By 1400 hours, the first fighter took off from Henderson Field. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft photographed the field that afternoon and reported it operational. Tokyo refused to believe the report. A second bombardment was planned for that night. But the pattern repeated. Shells fell. Seabees repaired. Aircraft flew. The cycle continued for months. By February 1943, when Japanese forces finally evacuated Guadalcanal, Henderson Field had endured more than 50 major bombardments and hundreds of air raids. It had never been out of action for more than 12 hours. The Seabees had proven something fundamental. Construction speed could defeat destruction speed. In Berlin, German intelligence officers studying Pacific operations struggled to reconcile reports with known engineering principles. Major Kurt von Tippelskirch, analyzing Japanese intelligence summaries for the Wehrmacht High Command, cabled Berlin in September 1942 with barely concealed skepticism. Japanese reports of American construction capabilities in Solomon Islands, impossible to reconcile with established engineering doctrine. No military force can construct operational airfields in reported timeframes, suggest propaganda, or systematic exaggeration. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But the time frames were accurate, and they were about to become even more compressed. The key innovation that enabled Seabee speed was already spreading across the Pacific: coral. The Pacific Islands were essentially coral formations thrust up from ancient ocean floors. This geological accident provided Seabees with the perfect construction material. When properly crushed and compacted, coral formed a surface harder than most concrete, with natural drainage properties that prevented the waterlogging that plagued dirt runways. The Bobcats at Bora Bora had pioneered coral construction techniques in early 1942. They discovered that coral could be blasted from nearby formations, crushed to proper aggregate size, spread in layers, wetted with seawater, and compacted with heavy rollers. The result was a runway surface that could support even the heaviest bombers. Seabees refined the process throughout 1942 and 1943. They developed portable crushing plants that could process coral at 100 tons per hour. They learned optimal crushing sizes for different applications. They discovered that mixing coral with seawater created superior binding compared to fresh water. They perfected compaction techniques that maximized surface hardness. The contrast with Japanese construction methods was stark. Japanese forces still relied heavily on manual labor. Conscripted workers carried individual baskets of dirt and stones. Construction equipment, when it existed, was limited and poorly maintained. A Japanese engineering unit required months to build what Seabees accomplished in weeks. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The transformation of New Georgia in mid-1943 showcased Seabee capabilities at their peak. Munda Point on New Georgia's southwestern coast had been identified as critical for Allied advance up the Solomon Islands chain. Japanese forces had constructed an airfield there, using it to attack American positions on Guadalcanal and intercept supply convoys. Allied strategy required capturing Munda and converting it from a Japanese liability into an American asset. The 9th Marine Defense Battalion and elements of the 43rd Infantry Division secured the area in early August 1943 after brutal fighting. The airfield they captured was heavily damaged from pre-invasion bombardment and deliberate Japanese sabotage. The 24th Naval Construction Battalion arrived on August 8 with orders that seemed impossible. Make Munda operational for fighter aircraft within 1 week. Extend and improve it for bomber operations within 3 weeks. Do this while Japanese artillery on nearby Kolombangara Island could still shell the field, and while Japanese air raids targeted the construction site daily. The 24th went to work with characteristic Seabee intensity. They filled bomb craters, cleared destroyed aircraft, removed sabotage charges that Japanese forces had planted but failed to detonate, and began extending the runway. Japanese observers on Kolombangara watched through field glasses as American bulldozers operated under shell fire, drivers protected only by armored cabs welded to their machines. August 15, 1943. 7 days after the 24th landed, the 1st Marine Fighter Squadron touched down at Munda. The runway was rough, barely adequate but operational. Pilots taxied around ongoing construction. Seabees worked on one end of the field while aircraft landed on the other. By month's end, Munda had become a major bomber base with parking for dozens of aircraft, complete fuel systems, ammunition storage, and repair facilities. The speed shocked Japanese commanders who had spent months building the original field. Commander Masatake Okumiya at Rabaul received reconnaissance photographs showing the transformation. His intelligence section initially declared the photos must be mislabeled. No construction force could accomplish such work in 3 weeks. A second reconnaissance flight confirmed the reports. Okumiya forwarded the photographs to Tokyo with a cover letter that summarized growing Japanese desperation. Enemy construction capabilities exceed all previous estimates. They build faster than we can destroy. They convert our own bases against us before we can mount effective counterattacks. Traditional defensive calculations based on construction timelines have become meaningless. Tokyo's response reflected institutional disbelief. The Imperial General Headquarters insisted field commanders were exaggerating American capabilities to excuse their own failures. Senior Japanese staff officers, trained in pre-war military engineering, simply could not accept that construction timelines could be reduced by factors of 10 or 20. German observers monitoring Pacific operations through neutral channels shared Japanese skepticism. Colonel Hans von Greifenberg, head of the Wehrmacht Foreign Army's intelligence section, studied reports filtering through Swedish diplomatic sources and Spanish merchant marine observers. He found them so extraordinary that he drafted a memo questioning their reliability. American Pacific construction reports, if accurate, indicate engineering capacity inconsistent with known military doctrine. Suggest verification through independent sources before incorporating into strategic assessments. Implications for European theatre, too, significant to accept without confirmation. But confirmation was coming, from the most unexpected source. German U-boat commanders operating in the Pacific were beginning to report similar observations. Submarine I-37 had conducted reconnaissance of Allied bases in the Solomons during September 1943. The submarine's captain reported seeing extensive construction activity at sites that Japanese intelligence had marked as recently captured. More significantly, he reported observing what appeared to be completely new airfields at locations where no previous installations existed. The reports seemed fantastic, but they came from experienced submarine commanders with no reason to fabricate intelligence. U-boat headquarters in Berlin began taking American construction capabilities more seriously. The implications were strategic and immediate. If Americans could indeed construct major bases in weeks rather than months, then the entire German defensive strategy for occupied Europe required rethinking. Atlantic Wall fortifications were designed to prevent Allied forces from establishing beachheads long enough to build supporting infrastructure. But if Americans could build that infrastructure in days rather than months, then the time window for counterattack collapsed to nothing. Admiral Dönitz raised these concerns in staff meetings throughout late 1943. He was largely ignored. Most German commanders considered Pacific operations irrelevant to European warfare. The terrain was different, the distances were different, and surely American capabilities observed in tropical islands could not translate to European beaches. They were catastrophically wrong. The same Seabees battalions building bases on coral atolls were developing techniques, equipment, and doctrine that would prove equally effective on Norman beaches. But that revelation lay months in the future. In the Pacific during 1943, Seabees were just beginning to demonstrate their full potential. The Treasury Islands operation in October 1943 demonstrated another dimension of Seabees capability. The islands, located between Bougainville and New Georgia, had been identified as necessary for the continued Allied advance. The 8th Brigade of the New Zealand 3rd Division would conduct the assault, supported by Marine units. The 87th Naval Construction Battalion would land with the assault waves. The 87th's mission was unprecedented. Build a functional fighter strip on Sterling Island while the island was still contested. Begin construction before Japanese defenders had been eliminated. Accept casualties from enemy fire as necessary to complete the mission on schedule. No Seabees battalion had yet attempted construction under such conditions. October 27, 1943. The 87th hit the beaches with the assault forces. Japanese defenders fought from prepared positions. Machine gun fire raked the beaches. Mortar rounds fell among landing craft. Seabees came ashore carrying rifles and construction tools simultaneously, ready to fight or build as circumstances required. Within hours, while New Zealand infantry were still clearing Japanese positions, Seabees had bulldozers operating. They began clearing jungle for the airfield site, while Japanese snipers fired from trees 200 yards away. Equipment operators worked with armed guards standing beside their machines. When operators were hit, replacements took their places without stopping the work. November 2nd, 1943, 6 days after landing, with Japanese defenders still holding portions of Sterling Island, the airfield became operational. Marine fighters landed while construction continued around them. Pilots could hear gunfire from the northern end of the island where New Zealand troops were still fighting. The field was rough, minimally adequate, but functional. Within 2 weeks, the 87th had transformed their emergency strip into a major base with parking for 40 aircraft, complete fuel systems, and repair facilities. The construction had cost 3 Seabees killed and 14 wounded, casualties accepted as the price of maintaining operational tempo. Captain Yasumi Doi of the Imperial Japanese Navy's 11th Air Fleet wrote in his after-action report, "We calculated enemy would require minimum 3 months to establish air operations from Treasury Islands based on standard construction timelines. Appearance of land-based fighters after 1 week suggests either pre-positioned facilities we failed to detect or construction capabilities that violate known engineering principles." Bougainville in November 1943 represented the ultimate test of Seabees doctrine. The island was massive, heavily defended, and critical to Japanese control of the Northern Solomons. Allied strategy called for securing a beachhead on Bougainville's western coast at Empress Augusta Bay, then rapidly constructing airfields to support further advances toward Rabaul. 3rd Marine Division stormed ashore November 1, 1943. 4 Seabee battalions landed with them. The 25th, 53rd, 71st, and 75th Naval Construction Battalions, totaling approximately 3,000 men, had orders to construct operational airfields faster than any yet attempted. Fighter strip operational within 5 weeks. Bomber field complete within 8 weeks. All work to proceed, while under Japanese artillery fire and air attack. The site selected for the first airfield, Torokina, was a swamp covered with dense jungle. It rained almost continuously. Japanese forces held positions in the surrounding hills and shelled the construction site daily. Conditions could hardly have been worse. The Seabees began work November 2nd, less than 24 hours after the Marines landed. They worked in shifts around the clock. Floodlights illuminated the construction site at night, making it an obvious target for Japanese artillery and bombers. The lights drew fire, but they also allowed work to continue through darkness. Equipment operators learned to keep working during air raids, trusting anti-aircraft gunners to protect them while they focused on grading and compacting. The swamp presented unique engineering challenges. Simply clearing jungle was insufficient. The ground itself was unstable, composed of decomposing vegetation over coral bedrock. Heavy equipment sank into the muck. Conventional grading techniques were useless. The Seabees developed innovative solutions. They used explosives to blast drainage channels through the coral substrate. They built corduroy roads from logs to provide stable surfaces for equipment movement. They imported coral from offshore reefs, crushing it and using it to create stable foundations above the swamp. December 10th, 1943, 39 days after landing, the first Marine fighters touched down at Torokina Fighter Strip. The runway was 6,500 feet long, surfaced with crushed coral and pierced steel planking. It had been built through swamp, jungle, and constant enemy fire in little more than 5 weeks, but the Seabees were not finished. Work continued on the bomber field at Paiva, a few miles inland. This facility required even more extensive construction. Bomber runways needed to be longer, wider, and stronger than fighter strips. The B-24s and B-25s that would operate from Paiva weighed far more than single-engine fighters. December 30th, 1943. The Paiva bomber strip became operational. Allied bombers could now strike Rabaul from Bougainville, completing the encirclement of Japan's major South Pacific base. The work that Japanese engineers calculated would require 6 months had been accomplished in 8 weeks, all while under fire. Commander Okumiya at Rabaul read the reconnaissance reports with mounting despair. In his personal diary, later captured when Rabaul fell, he wrote an assessment that captured Japanese understanding of what they faced. We planned our defensive strategy on the assumption that distance and terrain were our allies. We calculated American advance rates based on construction timelines that our own engineers considered optimistic. We never imagined they would reduce those timelines by factors of 10. Every defensive position, every fortified island, every calculation of time available to shift forces has become meaningless. They build faster than we can move. They establish bases faster than we can respond. We are not fighting an enemy. We are fighting inevitability itself. The statistics from Bougainville construction were staggering. 4 Seabee battalions had moved 11 million cubic yards of earth and coral. They had laid 15 miles of pierced steel planking. They had erected 800 prefabricated buildings. They had installed fuel systems capable of storing 1 million gallons. They had created ammunition dumps, repair facilities, hospitals, and housing for thousands of personnel, all in less than 90 days, all while under enemy fire. The Marianas Campaign in summer 1944 represented the culmination of everything Seabees had learned across 2 years of Pacific warfare. The strategic importance was obvious to both sides. From Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, American B-29 superfortresses could reach every major industrial target in Japan. Islands were approximately 1,500 miles from Tokyo, just within B-29 range. More importantly, they could be supplied directly from the United States by ship, eliminating the tortuous logistics that plagued operations from China and India. June 15, 1944, the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions stormed ashore at Saipan under heavy fire. The 121st Naval Construction Battalion landed with the assault waves, ready to turn captured airfields into operational bases immediately. Hyperwar, building the Navy's bases in World War II. Chapter 28. Japanese defenders fought desperately, knowing that loss of the Marianas would place the home islands under direct air attack. Despite fierce resistance, Marines captured Aslito Airfield on the southern end of Saipan within 4 days of landing. Seabees history, World War II. The 121st Battalion went to work on Aslito, even as fighting continued around the perimeter. They filled bomb craters, removed destroyed aircraft, repaired drainage systems, and restored the runway surface. Stopping only to defend against Japanese counterattacks, they had the field operational within 4 days of capture. Seabees history, World War II. Fighters began landing while Japanese artillery still shelled the northern end of the island. The speed shocked Japanese observers who watched from caves in the hills above the airfield. By June 29th, American fighters were providing close air support to Marines still fighting less than 2 miles away. Hyperwar, building the Navy's bases in World War II. Chapter 28. The pattern established at Guadalcanal and refined through dozens of operations had reached peak efficiency. Capture, repair, operate. The cycle now required less than 1 week. German intelligence officers studying reports of Saipan operations through neutral channels found the construction timelines incomprehensible. A Wehrmacht analysis dated July 1944 noted that if American reports were accurate, then all German assumptions about the time required to establish operational bases after amphibious assault required immediate revision. The analysis was filed and largely ignored by senior commanders focused on the impending Allied invasion of France. Following Saipan's capture on July 9th, attention turned immediately to Tinian, lying just 3 miles across a narrow strait. Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata commanded approximately 9,000 Japanese defenders who had watched Saipan fall and knew their fate was sealed. They prepared for a desperate defense. Battle of Tinian, 10 Wikipedia. July 24, 1944. The 4th Marine Division executed what would later be called the most perfectly planned amphibious operation of the war. Instead of landing on obvious beaches in the southwest, they struck 2 tiny beaches on the northwest coast, flanked by 8-foot coral cliffs that Japanese defenders considered impassable. Battle of Tinian, Wikipedia. The Seabees had solved the cliff problem weeks earlier. They removed steel members from a Japanese sugar mill on Saipan and fabricated 10 special ramps that mounted on amphibious tractors. These doodlebugs allowed Marines to climb the cliffs easily, surprising Japanese defenders who expected landings elsewhere. 6th Bomb Grupsto 12 Seabees the Marines poured ashore while Japanese forces rushed toward the wrong beaches. The 18th and 121st Construction Battalions landed with the Marines. Unlike previous operations where Seabees worked under Marine control during assault phases, Tinian placed all construction under unified command of the 6th Naval Construction Brigade from the beginning. The brigade would be responsible for building what planners envisioned as the largest airbase complex in the world. Hyperwar, building the Navy's bases in World War II. Chapter 28. The mission seemed impossible, even by Seabees standards. Build 6 runways, each 8,500 feet long and 200 feet wide. Create hard stands for 265 B-29 superfortresses. Install fuel storage for 16 million gallons of aviation gasoline. Construct ammunition bunkers for 30,000 tons of ordnance. House 50,000 personnel. 6 Bomb. Forces Bomb Group complete everything in under 90 days so bomber operations could begin before winter. Japanese engineers who had occupied Tinian for decades insisted the island was unsuitable for large-scale construction. The terrain was covered in dense jungle and sharp coral that destroyed conventional equipment, yet Tinian offered one overwhelming advantage. The island was essentially a massive coral formation with abundant construction material ready for exploitation. Tinian Mission. Sześć BG Original. Photos of Tinian 1944–45 Pacific War. By August 1st, just 8 days after landing, Marines had secured the island. Japanese casualties exceeded 8,000 killed. American losses were 328 dead and 1,571 wounded. Battle of Tinian, IMAA. Wikipedia. The rapid victory gave Seabees maximum time for construction before winter weather arrived. What followed was the greatest demonstration of construction capability in military history. The 6th Construction Brigade, eventually comprising 12 construction battalions and totaling more than 15,000 men, attacked Tinian with industrial efficiency that stunned observers. They worked 24 hours daily in 3 shifts. Equipment operated continuously. When one bulldozer broke down, another took its place immediately. They developed techniques specifically for Tinian's conditions. Instead of clearing jungle tree by tree, they chained bulldozers together in formation and drove through the forest, toppling everything in their path. Acres disappeared in hours. They used shaped explosive charges to blast coral formations, creating instant quarries. Mobile crushing plants processed coral around the clock, producing aggregate for runways and concrete. The scale was staggering. Seabees moved 11 million cubic yards of earth and coral, equivalent to digging a canal 10 feet deep, 50 feet wide, and 830 miles long. They paved runways with 900,000 square yards of asphalt, produced on site from portable plants. They laid 20 miles of taxiways connecting runways to hardstands. They erected 1,200 prefabricated Quonset huts, each assembled in hours from numbered sections shipped from the United States. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack and now analyzed American capabilities for the Imperial Navy, wrote in September 1944 an assessment that captured Japanese despair. The enemy possesses construction abilities that render our defensive calculations meaningless. They do not improve captured bases. They create superior facilities from nothing in less time than we require to dig defensive positions. Every island becomes an unsinkable aircraft carrier within days of capture. Traditional defensive strategies based on construction timelines are obsolete. German military observers reached similar conclusions. Major Hans von Luck, analyzing American capabilities for Wehrmacht headquarters, reported that if Americans could transform coral atolls into major air bases in 2 months, then all calculations for European coastal defense required revision. They would establish beachheads with operational ports and airfields before German reserves could respond. By October 1944, the first B-29 superfortresses began arriving at Tinian, Northfield with 4 8,500-foot runways, and Westfield, with 2 similar runways, comprised the largest airbase in the world. Sześć Bomb Group. Sześć Bomb Group. The complex included 13 miles of taxiways and parking for nearly 450 bombers. XX7 Bomber Command. 2 programs present. Wikipedia. Everything from fuel systems to repair shops was operational. November 24, 1944. The first B-29 mission against Tokyo launched from Saipan. Soon bombers from all 3 Marianas Islands were striking Japan in coordinated raids. 25 Bomber Command, Oreme. Wikipedia. The construction that Japanese engineers declared would require 18 months had been completed in 67 days. The bombers that Japanese strategists assumed would not threaten the home islands until late 1945 were already overhead. Over the following months, Tinian-based B-29s flew 19,000 combat sorties against Japan. Sześć Bomb Group. Sześć Bomb Group. The tonnage dropped exceeded everything American bombers had delivered against Germany. The strategic bombing campaign that broke Japanese industrial capacity and civilian morale launched from runways that Seabees built faster than anyone thought possible. Meanwhile, across the world, German commanders were learning the same lessons about Seabee capability. June 6, 1944. Allied forces stormed ashore at Normandy, in the largest amphibious invasion in history. German defensive doctrine assumed that even if Allies established a beachhead, they would require weeks or months to build the port facilities necessary to support major operations. During that time, German reserves could counterattack and drive the invaders back into the sea. Naval construction battalions landed with assault forces on Omaha and Utah beaches. They came ashore under heavy fire, suffering casualties from German artillery and machine guns. Their mission was unprecedented: build functional port facilities on open beaches, create fuel distribution systems, establish supply dumps, do everything necessary to sustain an army of millions without capturing an existing port. The Seabees accomplished exactly that. They built pontoon causeways from ships to shore, allowing vehicles to drive directly onto beaches. They assembled prefabricated piers that could handle Liberty ships. They laid fuel pipelines under the English Channel. They created ammunition dumps, repair facilities, and field hospitals. They did all of this while under fire and in weather that would have halted any civilian construction project. The Mulberry Harbours, massive artificial ports assembled from prefabricated sections towed across the Channel, represented the culmination of techniques developed in the Pacific. German observers who watched these harbours materialize couldn't believe their reports. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had toured Atlantic Wall defences in early 1944 and warned that Americans would establish operational beachheads faster than German doctrine anticipated. His warnings were ignored. By the time German commanders understood what they faced, it was too late. The Japanese Navy's final desperate attempt to counter American construction speed came in November 1944. Operation Tan specifically targeted Seabee equipment and personnel at Ulithi Atoll in the Western Carolines. 24 Chiton human torpedoes launched attacks designed to destroy bulldozers and construction machinery. Seabees in World War II, Wikipedia. The mission failed completely. Within hours of the attack, Seabees had repaired all damage and continued construction without interruption. Lieutenant Sekio Nishina, one of the Chiton program designers, wrote before his own suicide mission a letter that captured the futility Japanese forces felt. "We cannot match their building. For every airfield we destroy, they build 3. For every bulldozer we eliminate, they land 10 more. We are fighting time itself, and time favors them." The impact on Japanese strategic planning was catastrophic. Their entire defensive concept, the absolute national defense sphere, assumed each island fortress would require months for Americans to reduce and rebuild. Japanese planners calculated they could or shift forces between threatened points because American advance rates would be predictable and slow. Instead, Americans were building operational bases faster than Japanese naval forces could relocate between islands. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, admitted in post-war interrogation what Japanese commanders had realized by late 1944. "We planned for a war where distances and construction time were our allies." The Seabees eliminated both. They could build an airfield faster than we could sail from one island to another. Our mobility advantage was negated by their construction speed. The prefabrication revolution proved equally stunning to Axis observers. Everything from buildings to harbour facilities arrived in numbered pieces ready for assembly. Liberty ships carried knockdown airports in their holds. One vessel could deliver runway matting, control tower sections, fuel tanks, repair shops, barracks, even complete mess halls with refrigeration. A 100-bed hospital could be unloaded, assembled, and operational within 72 hours. Captain Wilhelm Doms, German naval attaché in Madrid, reported to Berlin after debriefing Spanish merchant sailors who had observed American operations. "Americans have industrialized warfare to a degree we never imagined. They mass-produce not just weapons but entire bases. Ships arrive carrying airports in crates. Harbours are assembled like children's toys. The very landscape becomes a factory product. The final vindication of Seabee doctrine came at Okinawa in April 1945. Nearly 55,000 Seabees, organized into 4 brigades, participated in the largest concentration of construction forces in history. Seabee history, World War II. They built or improved 8 major airfields while the battle still raged. They constructed port facilities that handled millions of tons of supplies. By August 1945, sufficient infrastructure existed to support the planned invasion of Japan itself. That invasion never came. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay took off from Northfield, Tinian, carrying components that Seabees had unloaded, stored, and helped assemble. The aircraft flew to Hiroshima and dropped the first atomic bomb. Seabee history, World War II. 3 days later, another Tinian-based B-29 struck Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on August 15th. The runways from which those missions launched had not existed 14 months earlier. They were built by men in their 30s and 40s, who knew construction, who understood coral and concrete and drainage, who could operate bulldozers under fire and defend their work sites with rifles. They accomplished what pre-war engineering manuals declared impossible, and did it routinely. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The post-war assessments told the story in numbers that couldn't be disputed. By June 30th, 1944, more than $3.23 billion had been spent on advanced base construction overseas, adding nearly $5.7 billion for shore facilities in the United States, created a total investment of approximately $9 billion since July 1, 1940. Navy Seabees had built 111 major airstrips across the Pacific. They had constructed 454 piers, 2,558 ammunition magazines, and 700 square blocks of warehouses. They had erected hospitals to serve 70,000 patients simultaneously. They had installed tanks storing 100 million gallons of gasoline. They had created housing for 1.5 million men. They had operated on more than 300 islands across 6 continents. They had moved more earth than was excavated for the entire Panama Canal. And they had done it all under enemy fire, in hostile conditions, at speeds that pre-war engineering considered impossible. The average time to build a 5,000-foot fighter strip dropped from 60 days in 1942 to 10 days in 1945. Bomber runways that required 90 days in 1942 were completed in 30 days by war's end. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, commander of Japanese forces on Saipan, wrote in his final message before committing suicide words that acknowledged what Japanese forces faced. The enemy's power lies not in their numbers but in their ability to appear anywhere and transform nothing into everything with impossible speed. They do not occupy territory. They recreate it in their image overnight. Field Marshal Rommel, inspecting Atlantic Wall defenses in 1944, had warned his staff about what was coming. If the Americans can build airfields on coral atolls in days, they will establish beachheads on our shores before we can react. Speed of construction, not speed of movement, will determine the next phase of warfare. Both commanders were correct, and both were powerless to stop what they had identified. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.